December 29, 1944. Ramitelli Airfield, Italy. Captain James McCullen of the 485th Bombardment Group climbed out of his B-24 Liberator and looked around the muddy Italian airfield where 17 bombers from his group had just made emergency landings. This isn't what I expected. The fuel gauges had hit red over the Adriatic. Weather too terrible to reach their home base. The radio operator had given them coordinates for the nearest friendly field, Ramitelli. McCullen hadn't recognized the name. Now, walking across the tarmac past rows of P-51 Mustangs, he understood why his crew had gone quiet. Every fighter bore the same distinctive marking, bright red tail surfaces that gleamed even in the gray Italian winter light. They'd landed at the home of the Red Tails, the Tuskegee Airmen. The fighters were meticulously maintained. Not a single panel out of alignment, not a smudge on the canopies. North American P-51D Mustangs, the most advanced fighter in the American arsenal, each one painted with red tail surfaces, red nosebands, and individual nose art. McCullen had heard the rumors whispered in briefing rooms across southern Italy. Black fighter pilots who supposedly abandoned bombers under attack. White crews who claimed they'd rather fly without escort than trust the colored squadron. But standing on this airfield, watching Tuskegee ground crews work with precision that matched any white unit he'd seen, McCullen felt those rumors crack like thin ice. A black officer in a leather flight jacket approached. Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., 332nd Fighter Group. Welcome to Ramitelli. We'll get your crews fed and bunked. Weather should clear in a few days. The next 5 days would transform everything McCullen thought he knew about the men flying the red-tailed Mustangs. What he didn't know yet, what nobody would fully understand for another 60 years, was that the combat record of the unit housing his stranded crews was about to become one of the most misunderstood and ultimately most powerful stories of the Second World War. The journey to that revelation at Ramitelli had begun 4 years earlier, in July 1941, when the United States Army Air Corps authorized the formation of the 99th Pursuit Squadron at Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. The decision came after pressure from civil rights organizations, the black press, and Eleanor Roosevelt, who had flown with Chief Civilian Instructor Charles Chief Anderson in 1941 to demonstrate that black pilots could fly as competently as white pilots. Lieutenant Colonel Noel Parrish took command of pilot training at Tuskegee Army Airfield in November 1941. Parrish, a white Kentuckian who would become one of the program's strongest advocates, implemented the same rigorous training standards used at white flying schools. The first class of 13 cadets began training in November 1941. On March 7, 1942, 5 cadets graduated. Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., 2nd Lieutenant Mac Ross, 2nd Lieutenant George Spencer Roberts, 2nd Lieutenant Lemuel Rodney Custis, and 2nd Lieutenant Charles Dabo. The 99th Fighter Squadron deployed to North Africa in April 1943, equipped with Curtiss P-40 Warhawk fighters. They flew their first combat mission on June 2, 1943, a dive-bombing attack against the German-held island of Pantelleria in the Mediterranean. Captain Charles B. Hall scored the squadron's first aerial victory on July 2, 1943, shooting down a Focke-Wulf F-190 fighter over Sicily. But almost immediately, the 99th Fighter Squadron faced challenges that had nothing to do with German pilots. Colonel William Mamier, commander of the 33rd Fighter Group to which the 99th was attached, submitted a memorandum in September 1943 claiming the squadron's performance was substandard. Mamier's memo cited supposed tactical deficiencies and recommended removing the black pilots from combat duty. The evaluation reached Washington, where it threatened to end the entire Tuskegee experiment. The War Department commissioned a statistical study. Analysts compared the 99th Fighter Squadron's performance in P-40 fighters against white squadrons flying identical aircraft in the Mediterranean theater. Mission reports from June through September 1943 provided the data: sorties flown, enemy aircraft engaged, tactical successes, losses sustained. The study's conclusion, delivered in March 1944, was clear. The 99th Fighter Squadron flew just as well as comparable white units. Every performance metric fell within normal ranges. There was no statistical evidence supporting Momier's claims. The 332nd Fighter Group, comprising the 100th, 301, and 302 Fighter Squadrons, deployed to Italy in February 1944, with Colonel Benjamin O. Davis in command. The 99th Fighter Squadron joined the 332nd in July 1944, creating the only entirely black fighter group in the United States Army Air Forces. In June 1944, the group transitioned to P-47 Thunderbolts and began painting their aircraft tails red. By July 1944, they had converted to P-51 Mustangs, and those red tails became their signature. The 332nd Fighter Group flew bomber escort missions across the length and breadth of Italy's participation in the strategic bombing campaign. They escorted B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators of the 15th Air Force against targets throughout southern Europe: oil refineries in Ploiești, Romania, marshalling yards in Austria, aircraft factories in Germany itself. On June 9, 1944, during their second bomber escort mission flying P-47 Thunderbolts, the 332nd lost its first bomber to enemy fighters. A single B-24 fell from formation over Munich. The next mission went better, then the next. The Red Tails developed a reputation not for abandoning bombers, but for staying close, sometimes too close, according to some white fighter pilots who preferred free-ranging tactics that allowed them to pursue German fighters away from the bomber formations. They escorted bombers to targets across Romania on July 12, 1944. Luftwaffe fighters hit the formation hard. 2 bombers went down. On July 18, 1944, over Memmingen, Germany, 1 bomber fell. 2 days later, on July 20, 1944, another mission, another loss. 4 missions in 6 weeks. 6 bombers lost to enemy fighters out of hundreds escorted. The summer and fall of 1944 established the pattern. The Tuskegee Airmen flew close escort, keeping their Mustangs near the bomber formations rather than climbing to pursue German fighters at higher altitudes. This tactical choice sacrificed opportunities for individual aerial victories but reduced bomber losses. Mission after mission, red-tailed Mustangs brought bomber crews home. White bomber crews began noticing. After Captain McCulloch and his fellow pilots spent those 5 days at Ramatelli in December 1944, they returned to their units with stories that contradicted everything they'd been told. The Tuskegee pilots were professional, skilled, disciplined. Their aircraft were immaculately maintained. Their hospitality toward the stranded white crews had been genuine and generous. Word spread through bomber squadrons across southern Italy. When mission planners asked bomber commanders which fighter groups they wanted for escort, more and more voices requested the Red Tails. The colored squadron that Colonel Momier had claimed wasn't fit for combat duty had become one of the most requested fighter groups in the theater. But the advantage of close escort tactics depended entirely on the Luftwaffe's declining strength. As German fighter forces weakened in late 1944 and early 1945, fewer bombers fell to enemy aircraft regardless of which fighters escorted them. The Red Tails' protective record continued through the winter of 1944-1945. Mission after mission, hundreds of bombers escorted through hostile skies. But by March 1945, the tactical picture had transformed completely. The Luftwaffe, desperate and depleted, had committed its most advanced weapons to defend the Reich itself. Messerschmitt's Me-260 jet fighters, the world's first operational jet-powered aircraft, screamed through bomber formations at speeds exceeding 540 miles per hour, more than 100 miles per hour faster than even the P-51 Mustang. March 24, 1945. The longest bomber escort mission flown by any fighter group of the 15th Air Force during the entire war. Berlin, 1,600 miles round trip from Ramitelli. The 332nd Fighter Group launched 51 P-51 Mustangs to escort bombers striking the Daimler-Benz tank works in the German capital. First Lieutenant Roscoe Brown, flying as part of the 100th Fighter Squadron, spotted them first. 3 Me-262s diving toward the bomber formation from 25,000 feet, using their tremendous speed advantage to slash through the escorts. The jet's 4 30mm Mk-108 cannons could destroy a B-17 with a single burst. Brown pushed his throttle forward and turned into the attacking jets. The Me-262 in his gun sight was decelerating, preparing to make its firing pass on the bombers. Brown closed to 800 yards, 600, 400. The jet pilot never saw him. Brown fired. His 6.50 caliber machine guns converged on the Me-260's fuselage. Pieces of aluminum skin tore away. The jet's left engine burst into flames. The Me-262 rolled inverted and entered a spin, streaming black smoke. Brown watched it fall, the Luftwaffe's most advanced fighter, destroyed by a pilot the United States military had once claimed couldn't handle a pursuit aircraft. 2 more Me-262s fell that day. Second Lieutenant Earl Lane shot down the second jet. Second Lieutenant Charles Brantley destroyed the third. 3 of Nazi Germany's jet fighters, each worth more than a dozen conventional aircraft, knocked from the sky by Tuskegee Airmen over Berlin itself. But the mission carried another significance that wouldn't be discovered for decades. 1 bomber from the formation fell to German fighters that day. March 24, 1945 would prove to be the last date on which the 332nd Fighter Group lost a bomber to enemy aircraft. From the beginning of their bomber escort missions in June 1944 until the end of combat operations in April 1945, mission reports documented exactly 7 dates when bombers under Red Tail Escort fell to Luftwaffe fighters: June 9, July 12, July 18, and July 20 in 1944, and March 24, 1945. Air Force historian Daniel Hallman, working decades later at the Air Force Historical Research Agency, examined every mission report filed by the 332nd Fighter Group. He counted every bomber in every formation they escorted. He tracked which bombers fell and on what dates. His research, published in 2007, documented the truth with statistical precision. The Tuskegee Airmen lost bombers on exactly 7 missions. The total number of bombers lost, 27. 27 bombers in 179 escort missions flown between June 1944 and April 1945. When Hallman compared this to other fighter groups flying similar missions for the 15th Air Force during the same period, the numbers revealed something extraordinary. White fighter groups flying P-51 Mustangs in comparable missions lost an average of 46 bombers to enemy fighters during equivalent periods. The 332nd Fighter Group, flying the same aircraft, escorting the same types of bombers, facing the same Luftwaffe pilots, had lost significantly fewer bombers than their white counterparts. The revelation was complex. For 6 decades after the war, the Tuskegee Airmen's story had been told with a claim that proved to be inaccurate, that they had never lost a bomber to enemy fighters. The statement appeared in books, documentaries, congressional records, even in promotional materials from the Air Force itself. General Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., when interviewed by historian Alan Grotman years after the war, admitted he had questioned the claim himself. But it had been repeated so many times that people, including some of the airmen themselves, had come to believe it. The truth was more nuanced and ultimately more powerful. The story of why the Tuskegee Airmen achieved their exceptional bomber protection record requires understanding the tactical philosophy that guided the 332nd Fighter Group's operations, and how that philosophy differed from approaches used by many white fighter groups in the same theater. Fighter tactics in 1944 to 1945 involved constant tension between two missions: protecting bombers and shooting down enemy aircraft. These goals often conflicted. To maximize opportunities for aerial victories, fighter pilots preferred climbing to higher altitudes where they could spot enemy fighters early and engage them well away from bomber formations. This aggressive approach produced impressive individual kill counts, but sometimes left bombers vulnerable during the critical moments when German fighters penetrated to attack range. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. issued clear instructions to his pilots: stay with the bombers. The 332nd Fighter Group would fly close escort, positioning their P-51 Mustangs within visual range of the bomber formations they protected. When Luftwaffe fighters appeared, Red Tails would engage them, but only close to the bombers. Pilots who chased German fighters away from the formations, even when victory seemed certain, faced Davis's discipline. This tactical choice involved explicit trade-offs. Close escorts sacrificed opportunities for individual glory. A pilot staying near the bombers might watch German fighters escape rather than pursue them. The 332nd Fighter Group's total of 112 aerial victories across all their combat operations, while respectable, fell below the scores achieved by some white fighter groups whose more aggressive tactics produced higher individual kill counts. But Davis's philosophy prioritized the mission over personal achievement. The mission was bomber protection. Aerial victories mattered only insofar as they contributed to bringing bomber crews home alive. Davis, who had graduated from West Point in 1936 as the first black cadet in the 20th century to do so, understood that his pilot's performance would be scrutinized more carefully than any white unit. He couldn't allow the Tuskegee Airmen to be accused of abandoning bombers to chase personal glory. The mathematics of the tactical choice were straightforward. A bomber formation under attack needed fighters present at the moment of attack. Fighters miles away pursuing enemy aircraft couldn't defend bombers under immediate threat. The question became, what measured success? Individual pilots' aerial victory totals, or bomber crews brought home safely? Davis chose bomber crew survival. His pilots followed that choice through every mission they flew. The 332nd Fighter Group's relatively modest aerial victory total reflected not inferior skill, but a deliberate tactical decision that prioritized protection over personal achievement. This approach worked precisely because the Tuskegee Airmen flew their aircraft with the same skill as white pilots, demonstrated the same combat proficiency, and executed close escort tactics with discipline and precision. When German fighters attempted to penetrate to bomber formations, red-tailed Mustangs were positioned to intercept them. The numbers proved it. 27 bombers lost in 179 missions, compared to 46 lost on average by groups using more aggressive tactics. The strategic context mattered as well. By mid-1944, when the 332nd began bomber escort operations, Allied air superiority over Europe had become overwhelming. The Luftwaffe's fighter forces were declining in both numbers and pilot quality. The desperate attacks that did occur required defenders positioned exactly where Davis kept his pilots, close to the bombers. The consequences of the Tuskegee Airmen's tactical approach and demonstrated combat effectiveness extended far beyond the statistical advantages in bomber protection. Their record became evidence in a larger struggle that had been building since before the first black cadets entered flight training at Tuskegee. Captain Charles McGee flew 409 combat missions over 3 wars: World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. making him one of the most experienced fighter pilots in American military history. In 1944, flying P-51 Mustangs with the 302nd Fighter Squadron, McGee understood that every mission carried weight beyond the immediate tactical objective. "We knew we were fighting two wars," McGee later recalled, "one against the enemy in front of us and one against people back home who didn't think we could do it." First Lieutenant Lee Archer shot down 4 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, achieving ace-worthy status, though official records disputed one victory. On October 12, 1944, during a strafing mission against German ground targets near Athens, Greece, Archer destroyed 3 aircraft on the ground and shot down a Luftwaffe fighter attempting to intercept his flight. His combat performance matched any white pilot's, a fact that the statistics increasingly made undeniable. The accumulation of evidence mounted mission by mission. From June 1944 through April 1945, the 332nd Fighter Group flew 311 missions for the 15th Air Force, including 179 bomber escort missions. They destroyed 112 enemy aircraft in aerial combat. They destroyed another 150 German aircraft on the ground during strafing attacks. They damaged 148 more. They destroyed 950 railroad cars, trucks, and other vehicles. They sank or damaged numerous German vessels, including putting an Italian torpedo boat out of action. The group earned 3 Distinguished Unit citations, the military's highest unit award, for exceptional performance in combat. 96 individual pilots received the Distinguished Flying Cross. The accumulation of medals, the verified destruction of enemy equipment, the documented protection of bomber formations, all of it created a record that became increasingly difficult for critics to dismiss. But the most powerful evidence came not from official reports, but from the white bomber crews who flew under red-tailed Escort. After those 17 B-24s from the 485th Bomber Group spent 5 days at Ramitelli in December 1944, Captain McCullen and his fellow pilots spread the truth through bomber squadrons across Italy. The Tuskegee Airmen were professional, skilled, and reliable. The racist rumors claiming they abandoned bombers had no basis in fact. Other bomber crews reported similar experiences. Mission after mission, red-tailed Mustangs brought them through hostile skies. When given the choice, bomber commanders increasingly requested the 332nd Fighter Group for escort duty. The combat record spoke for itself with a clarity that no amount of prejudice could obscure. On April 1, 1945, the 332nd Fighter Group flew one of their final major missions, escorting bombers to targets in Austria. The mission lasted 5 hours and 40 minutes. Not a single bomber was lost. 12 days later, on April 13, 1945, they flew their last combat mission of the war. By then, they had compiled a record that would reverberate through American military and social history for decades. The cost had been significant. 66 Tuskegee Airmen died in combat. 32 were shot down and captured as prisoners of war. They faced the same dangers as white pilots: anti-aircraft fire, mechanical failure, weather, enemy fighters, while simultaneously facing discrimination from their own military. They flew and fought knowing that success would be scrutinized, while failure would be used as evidence of racial inferiority. Yet they succeeded. The mission reports, squadron records, and bomber crew testimonies documented performance that equaled or exceeded white units. The Tuskegee Airmen had proven through combat, the most demanding test possible, that skin color had no relationship to pilot capability. The complete record of the Tuskegee Airmen's combat operations provides statistical clarity to their achievement. Between April 1943 and April 1945, Tuskegee pilots flew 1,578 combat missions in the Mediterranean theater of operations. 1,267 missions for the 12th Air Force in North Africa, Sicily, and Italy, and 311 missions for the 15th Air Force conducting strategic bombing operations. Of those 311 15th Air Force missions, 179 were dedicated bomber escort missions. The 332nd Fighter Group flew multiple aircraft types during their combat operations. The 99th Fighter Squadron began operations in April 1943, flying Curtiss P-40L Warhawks, armed with 6.50 caliber machine guns and capable of 362 miles per hour at altitude. When the full 332nd Fighter Group arrived in Italy in February 1944, they initially flew Bell P-39Q Aerocobras, an aircraft with a 37mm cannon firing through the propeller hub, but plagued by high-altitude performance limitations that made it poorly suited for bomber escort. In June 1944, the group transitioned to Republic P-37D Thunderbolts. Robust, heavily armed fighters weighing nearly 8 tons when fully loaded, powered by 2,300 horsepower radial engines capable of surviving tremendous battle damage. The P-37's 8.50 machine guns and ability to carry bombs and rockets made it an excellent ground attack aircraft, but its weight and size made it less maneuverable than dedicated interceptors. By July 1944, the 332nd Fighter Group had converted to North American P-51 Mustangs, the aircraft they would fly for the remainder of the war. The P-51D combined 1,490 horsepower Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engines with aerodynamic efficiency that produced exceptional range and performance. Armed with 6.50 machine guns with 1,880 rounds total ammunition, capable of 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, possessing enough fuel capacity to escort bombers to Berlin and back, the P-51D represented the finest long-range escort fighter of the war. The Tuskegee Airmen marked their Mustangs distinctively: red tail surfaces, red nosebands. Individual aircraft carried nose art and pilot names. The red markings made the 332nd's aircraft immediately identifiable, both to bomber crews who requested them and to German pilots who learned to recognize them. Loss rates for the 332nd Fighter Group fell within normal ranges for fighter operations. Of 66 Tuskegee Airmen killed in combat, most died in circumstances unrelated to aerial combat: anti-aircraft fire, mechanical failure, weather-related crashes, and ground attack missions. The group lost aircraft at rates comparable to white fighter units conducting similar operations in the same theater. The critical statistic, the one that would eventually reshape understanding of their achievement, remained the bomber loss figure. 27 bombers lost to enemy fighters in 179 escort missions. Air Force Historical Research Agency Daniel Hallman's analysis showed that other 15th Air Force P-51 groups flying comparable missions during the same period lost an average of 46 bombers. The comparative analysis revealed the significance. The 332nd Fighter Group didn't just perform adequately, they performed better than average at the mission that mattered most. Their close escort tactics, combined with pilot skill and discipline, produced measurably superior bomber protection. The American approach to fighter design and operation contrasted sharply with both German and Japanese philosophies. American fighters incorporated pilot armor, self-sealing fuel tanks, and redundant systems that prioritized crew survival. These protective features added weight and reduced performance, but they brought pilots home alive to fight again. The statistics demonstrated the wisdom of this approach. Experienced American pilots survived to train new pilots, creating a virtuous cycle of increasing skill and capability. The Tuskegee Airmen proved the American system worked regardless of pilot race. Given equivalent training at Tuskegee Army Airfield, equivalent equipment in the form of P-51 Mustangs, and combat opportunities in the Mediterranean theater, black pilots performed identically to white pilots. The mission records documented it with mathematical precision. December 29, 1944. Ramitelli Airfield, Italy. Captain James McCullen prepared to depart after 5 days with the Tuskegee Airmen. Weather had cleared. His B-24 and the other 16 liberators from the 485th Bomberment Group had been refueled and readied for flight. As McCullen walked to his aircraft, he passed the rows of red-tailed Mustangs that had sheltered his crew. Everything he'd been told about these pilots had been wrong. The professional competence, the attention to detail, the genuine hospitality toward white crews who'd landed unexpectedly at their base, it had all contradicted the racist assumptions McCullen had heard repeated as fact. When he returned to his unit, McCullen would tell the truth. When his group flew missions requiring escort, he would request the red tails. The irony was profound. For 60 years after the war ended, the Tuskegee Airmen's story was told with a factual error, the claim that they never lost a bomber to enemy fighters. That myth became so widespread, so frequently repeated, that even General Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. himself questioned whether to correct it. The statement appeared in official Air Force publications, in books and documentaries, in congressional records honoring the Tuskegee Airmen. When Air Force historian Daniel Hallman finally examined the mission reports in 2007, he found the truth. 27 bombers lost on 7 missions between June 1944 and April 1945. Some supporters of the Tuskegee Airmen worried that correcting the myth would diminish their achievement. Instead, the truth proved more powerful than the myth. 27 bombers lost, compared to an average of 46 lost by other P-51 groups. The Tuskegee Airmen, facing racism and fighting to prove themselves worthy of flying combat missions, had protected their bombers better than white fighter groups. They had achieved this while simultaneously battling discrimination from their own military leadership, while proving their worth to skeptical bomber crews, while carrying the weight of knowing that their failure would be used as evidence against all Black Americans seeking military opportunity. The mathematics were undeniable. The mission reports documented it. The bomber crews who flew under Red Tail Escort testified to it. The aerial victory records, the ground attack statistics, the medals earned, all confirmed what should have been obvious from the beginning. Talent, courage, and skill recognize no color barrier. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. retired from the Air Force in 1970 as a lieutenant general. In 1998, President Bill Clinton advanced him to 4-star general on the retired list, the first black 4-star general in Air Force history. Charles McGee retired as a colonel after flying 409 combat missions. Lee Archer became a successful businessman after the war. Roscoe Brown earned a doctorate and became a university president. In 2007, President George W. Bush awarded the Congressional Gold Medal collectively to the Tuskegee Airmen, approximately 14,000 individuals who trained as pilots, navigators, bombardiers, mechanics, instructors, and support personnel at Tuskegee Army Airfield between 1941 and 1946. The medal recognized not just their combat record, but their role in ending military segregation. On July 26, 1948, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981 mandating equal treatment and opportunity in the armed forces regardless of race. The order didn't mention the Tuskegee Airmen specifically, but their combat record provided irrefutable evidence that racial segregation served no military purpose. When critics claimed integration would harm combat effectiveness, supporters pointed to the Red Tails' documented performance over Europe. The Tuskegee Airmen's achievement wasn't that they never lost a bomber. Their achievement was proving through measurable combat performance that Black Americans could fly, fight, and lead as effectively as anyone else when given equal training and opportunity. They demonstrated this truth in the most demanding environment possible: combat against a skilled and determined enemy. The examination of their mission reports at the Air Force Historical Research Agency provided the final documentation. The 332nd Fighter Group was not a special unit that transcended normal military capabilities. They were simply competent, professional pilots who flew their missions with discipline and skill. That they happened to be black made their achievement revolutionary in 1944. That their race should have been irrelevant was the lesson they proved. The red-tailed Mustangs that sheltered Captain McCullen's bomber at Ramitelli on December 29, 1944, represented more than just tactical aircraft. They symbolized the truth that combat performance is colorblind. The Tuskegee Airmen didn't just fight the Luftwaffe over Europe. They fought prejudice within their own military and won both battles, changing America forever. And in that single fact lies the entire story of why their real record, documented and verified, matters more than any myth ever could.